The lie was, don't worry about the flood. It's not going to happen. You can just keep on living life the way you've been living it. Everything is fine. That was the lie. That's the message today, too. Just keep on doing what you're doing. Follow your heart. Everything will be fine.
Right.
Why did God wait those 7 days, do you think?
I don't know.
Don't you think it was because he wanted to have it demonstrated in front of the angels and maybe the onlooking universe that the people that were left outside the ark really were wanting nothing to do with what was going on inside the ark?
The conflict between good and evil, wars, crime, political intrigue, civil unrest, religious tyranny. Who controls history? Is there a meaning to life? Is God real, and is there a devil? That's what we talk about. This is the Great Controversy Podcast.
Welcome back to the Great Controversy Podcast. In last episode, we did kind of a part one of the flood and the story before the flood, how the earth was, sin, that it was so great that God said we need to destroy the world. And we talked about Noah and building the ark and how Noah was preaching. And so in today's episode, we're going to talk more about kind of the science around the flood. Like, was there a flood? Can you tell that there was a flood? Like, what is the evidence of a flood? Because, that's the flood is kind of that one of those things that creation, evolution says there was no flood, that's not included in that. But the flood will help us explain logically the world we live in today. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that in this episode.
And one of the other things we talked about is why the book of Enoch is not an explainer of Genesis chapter 6, verse 2, and the interaction between the sons of God and the daughters of men. So if you're uncertain about that, go back to the previous episode and listen to that explanation. And we, I think, pretty definitively deal with who the sons of God are. They are the human beings that were supposed to be on God's side, and they failed God by taking wives of the sons of men, who were those who were in rebellion against God. And that mixing the spiritual outlook really is what created the sin in the world to the extent that it was.
So we saw that Noah, he was preaching, giving the people a chance. God was giving the people a chance. The evil people, that were steeped in sin, they were given a chance. They watched that ark being built for 120 years. They could have had the choice. They did have the choice, is what I should say, to walk onto that ark with Noah and his family. And yet no one did, and only 8 people.
Yes. So I think in light of that, I think we need to pray and really seek God's wisdom, because when you think of the population of the world of that time and how quickly sin took hold, it can take hold just as quickly in our own lives. So let's pray and ask God for his spirit as we're seeking to bring light to his word. Father, we do thank you for the opportunity to bring your word to light, not necessarily that we bring light to it. It is light. And we ask that your Holy Spirit would enlighten our minds today as we record this episode. Let your spirit speak through us, and please work in the hearts of those who listen and watch. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Yeah, I want to talk about one thing that we didn't touch on last time, Matthias, and that is this taking the animals on the morrow. Now, that was a miraculous thing.
That was one of those things that if you were someone standing there and you didn't believe anything else that was done before, this massive ark being built, I'm sure it was like, one of the many wonders of the world at that time. They were just shocked by it, and probably tons of people flocked to see it. And yet they were all there. And then all of a sudden, animals just start coming out of the trees and out of the forest, just different places. And these animals start coming to the ark and going inside of it.
2 by 2.
2 by 2. I mean, if you didn't believe anything before, you would think that would cause someone to say, wait a second, maybe Noah's right. Maybe this is true. Maybe there is going to be a flood. I mean, nature is literally going onto this ark to save itself.
In obedience to God.
In obedience. Did they know it was to God? I mean,
the animals you mean?
Yeah, and there were probably people, they probably thought that there was some remember In the, I don't know if you guys have listened to the Bible in living sound. It's like your story hour, but it's like Bible stories. And then in the Bible stories, guys, it's like, that's just, don't worry. It's just another one of Noah's magic tricks, And so they probably thought that. They probably thought, oh, this is some magic trick of Noah's. And he's somehow calling the animals onto the ark.
Well,
They couldn't fathom that something that could be tied to God.
okay. So this demonstrates to us the power of deception, the power of sin. They continue to believe the lies that they've
Right.
been told. And the lie was, don't worry about the flood. It's not going to happen. You can just keep on living life the way you've been living it. Everything is fine. That was the lie. That's the message today too. Just keep on doing what you're doing. Follow your heart. Everything will be fine.
Right.
So to me, this was a great sign of the truth of Noah's message, and the people refused to believe it. And I just don't, for the life of me, understand how you could overlook that. But
Right.
they did, and people do today. One of the most important pieces of evidence that there is in support of Christianity is people who are transformed in heart. That is as miraculous as animals coming 2 by 2 onto the ark.
Right.
So that struck me there when I just read verse 8 of clean animals, of animals. This is Genesis chapter 7. I'm sorry, I forgot to give the chapter. Genesis chapter 7, verse 8, of clean animals, of animals that are unclean, of birds, and of everything that creeps on the earth. 2 by 2, they went into the ark to Noah, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. So this is a miraculous thing. Animals just don't wander in. Lions do not wander into the ark by accident.
No.
God directed them to do that.
Okay. So all these animals go onto the ark. Noah and his family, they go into the ark, and then something else miraculous happens. The door closes all by itself. The gigantic door closes all by itself on its own.
Well, there would have been no way for them to close it.
No, they were inside.
They were inside. And it had to be a massive door. You couldn't have a weak door. It would have just ruptured.
It would have probably been hit. The ark was probably hit by lots of things that were floating in the water, stumps and, other things that might have been floating.
It had to be
It might have
very
struck by
heavily constructed.
Yeah. So anyway, that was another miracle that happened. And, the people were probably like a bit worried and concerned when they saw the animals and when they saw the door close all by itself. But then, because Noah was in the ark how long before?
Well, that's what I
started?
was going to bring up next.
Yeah, well, bring that up.
Verse 10 of Genesis chapter 7. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were on the earth. After 7 days. So what happened when Noah and the animals went into the ark?
Nothing happened for
Nothing
7
happened.
days.
Nothing happened for 7 days.
So the people, when on the second day, they were like, on the third day, fourth day, fifth day, they were like, yes. Nothing's happening. Nothing's going to happen.
Why did God wait those 7 days, do you think?
I don't know.
Don't you think it was because he wanted to have it demonstrated in front of the angels and maybe the onlooking universe that the people that were left outside the ark really were wanting nothing to do with what was going on inside the ark?
Almost like he was trying to get the last chance, even though they're really almost like let's just like God is just up there and he's like, let's just see real quick, just for 7 days. I just want to see if there's any that changed their mind. I just want to see if anyone's changed their mind. But no one did.
Well, but once that door was shut, it wasn't going to be open again.
Well, I know, but it's almost like God was like, let me just double check. It just shows like love.
Well, that too. But I also think that he wanted it demonstrated that no one would change their mind.
Yeah.
Right? He wanted it to be
But
demonstrated
no one did.
that they had really, truly rejected Noah and his message. So God demonstrated that the decision that people had made was final. And of course, this has tremendous implications for our time, right? Because inside the ark of safety, there's a really great documentary out there called The Days of Noah.
It's called In the Days of Noah, I think, isn't it? Or
I think it's just the days of Noah.
I thought it was in the days of Noah, but look up both of them, you'll find
Yeah,
it.
you'll find it. But
It's by Layman Ministry.
Layman Ministry, yeah, put it out. Jeff Rich. Fantastic documentary, very well done. And they connect the entrance of Noah into the ark with the entrance of God's people by faith into the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, where they are. Noah was sealed. What is it? It's the days of Noah. Okay. But Noah and his family were sealed inside the ark. And God's people in the end are going to be sealed because they have entered in by faith into the most holy place with Jesus. And that's where they are protected. And Noah was protected in the ark.
Okay, so they get in the ark, the flood waters are covering there. But this is just massive. And
So let's
you
talk
go
a
ahead
little
and
bit
talk
about that.
You talk about real quick. I'm going to look for a very quote that was very interesting.
Okay. Well, it says in Genesis 7, verse 11, that it was in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. So scientifically, what's going on here? Evidently, the water that we see in the oceans today was, to a great extent, underneath the ground before. There were not these massive oceans that we have. In fact, oceans cover the majority of the earth now, but it wasn't that way in Noah's time. So the water that was underground, by the way, that scientifically speaking, what we have here is a concept that we've done on several of our houses, which is radiant heat.
Mm-hmm.
There's a hot core of the earth, and then on top of that was a layer of water.
And what happens?
Well, your whole surface of the ground would have stayed warm everywhere, even in the polar regions.
Yeah. And what happens when you have when you have like lava, fire, and water? What happens when you have those two things?
Yes, you can have steam.
There could have been steam just blasting out of the ground, blowing things out of the ground.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Rocks and all that stuff high up into the air. Let me just finish with the in-floor heat concept. So here's the question. Does that idea of having warm water, hot water circulating underneath the surface of the earth throughout, does that match up with what we see under the ground today? And the answer to that is yes, it does. Because when oil drillers went to Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, guess what they found underneath the Arctic ice? Palm fronds. There were palm trees growing in the Arctic. Evidently, the earth was of a more uniform temperature before the flood, much more uniform. And the earth was not dependent on the heat of the sun for its warmth. It was heated internally, just like we do with some of our slabs in our homes. It's the most comfortable heat that you can have. It just warms you from the bottom. And, even if the air temperature is slightly cooler in the house, you don't feel that because you feel that heat radiating out of the floor. And so God set up a system like that, evidently, prior to the flood, and it worked amazingly well. So you have that, the fountains of the great deep, and then the windows of heaven were opened. So there was evidently also a layer of water above the atmosphere. I don't know what form that was, whether it was ice or some other form, but what that would have done, it would have diffused the sun's rays like a greenhouse all around the earth, so that even in the Arctic, yes, there would have been a darker time and a lighter time, but even in the Arctic, in those regions, there would have been plenty of light to grow plants. So very interesting design of the original earth.
And you might think, why wouldn't God have just designed for there to be 5 suns around the earth so that no place on earth? God doesn't like do weird things. Like he does things. It's like he does something and without something else. I'm not sure how to explain this, but he doesn't build like a one-piece mechanism. He likes to build something where you may, like if you didn't have this other thing, then you would have a problem. But he likes to build something that has like everything all works together to make it perfect. And if you take something away, now there's a problem. It's a mess. Right.
Matches with the idea we were discussing in our episode on evolution, where we were talking about irreducible complexity on the cellular level.
Yeah.
So good. Well, you want to read your quote from this Bible commentator.
This is interesting. It says, so this is talking about, right, they were in the ark for 7 days. And then I'm going to start reading here. It says, but upon the 8th day, dark clouds overspread the heavens. There followed the muttering of thunder and the flash of lightning. Soon large drops of rain began to fall. The world had never witnessed anything like this, and the hearts of men were struck with fear. All were secretly inquiring, can it be that Noah was in the right, and that the world is doomed to destruction? Darker and darker grew the heavens, and faster came the falling rain. The beasts were roaming about in the wildest terror, and their discordant cries seemed to moan out their own destiny and the fate of man. The fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Water appeared to come from the clouds in mighty cracks. Rivers broke away from their boundaries and overflowed the valleys. Jets of water burst from the earth with indescribable force, throwing massive rocks hundreds of feet into the air, and these, in falling, buried themselves deep in the ground. Yeah, but it just goes to show, the global scale of this flood. Just if you look up a video of some flash floods and stuff, and you can see it just takes out an entire bridge. It takes a house that is built on a foundation, just lifts it up and just carries it away.
Do you remember where we used to live back in Pennsylvania?
Yes.
When I was pastor of the Johnstown, Pennsylvania church, and we went to the Johnstown Flood Museum. Do you remember that? You don't remember that. You were just a little kid then. But that flood took a massive swath of that city out, killed between 2,000 and 3,000 people, I think. But it was just some rain, some days of rain in a lake that had been improperly dammed up upstream. Right. But the power of that floodwater was unreal.
And so we're talking about, was Noah's flood a global flood? Was this a global flood? It wasn't just flood.
Okay, so why don't you get us into that?
Well, so what are some of the things that we can look at? The geology. If we look at geology, do you see evidence of a flood? Or do we not see does it look like it's just always been this way? Or does it look like, do we have evidence of a flood?
Okay, well, what are some of the evidences?
Well, in the flood, you would say, right, that if there was a massive global flood, would there not be this is literally a little song, but billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid in water all over the earth?
Yeah, that is a great song for kids. We used to enjoy singing that, by the way.
So, but is that not something you would expect to see? If there was a global flood, would there not be just billions of fossilized? There's things that are difficult for evolution to explain, because there's these fossil graveyards.
Yes.
There's these perfectly formed, perfect fossils. And there's even a fossil of I forget what animal it was, in the process of giving birth. What? How does that make sense with evolution? And you see these different layers where they're bent, and there's layers like the great unconformity. You see all these different things with layers, and just look at the mountains. Honestly, when I look at the lay of the land, when I just look at it, I think, the flood. And the reason I say that is because when I look at it, I see jaggedness. I see things that are very run down. You see piles of rock with weird layers going sideways and all these things like that. You see mountains, we live in the Rocky Mountains. You look at the Rocky Mountains, why are they called the Rocky Mountains? Because they're very jagged. Think about the Grand Canyon. Do you really think that little river eroded that Grand Canyon? No, there was a massive amount of water, and you also look at Arizona. like Phoenix, Arizona, does that not look like maybe a bunch of water kind of flowed down there towards the end of towards the end of the flood, and that was just a big gigantic lake, and then the water eventually like seeped down into the ground, receded away. But there's just, in my opinion, when you look at the lay of the land, it looks terrorized by water. Like the story of the flood, it makes sense.
Okay.
You find in there.
Yeah, here's
Great
what I
Unconformity.
found on the Great Unconformity. This is Wikipedia's statement now.
Okay.
There is currently no widely accepted explanation for the Great Unconformity among geoscientists. Now, they have hypotheses, okay, significant glaciation event, snowball Earth, blah, 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 blah. But here's the real issue. The Great Unconformity is what we would consider to be maybe original rock of the Earth.
Oh,
And
there's like a stark line,
yeah,
and there's
this
like almost like a gap.
gap.
Like you can
And then
almost push something.
sedimentary deposits that are on top of this.
And it's all over the world. You can look at it in the Grand Canyon. You can find the Great Unconformity in the Grand Canyon. And then you can go over to England and you can see it. It's all,
Yeah, there's a picture here in the Wikipedia article of Montezuma, New Mexico.
yeah,
Right.
it's everywhere.
So the point is, of course, that to explain the world without the flood, you have to make some assumptions. And we talked about this with our episode on evolution versus creation. And, it's not our purpose to explain all of that, just to say that there must be assumptions made if you're going to explain what we see in the geology of the Earth without the flood. So what are some of the other evidences for the flood?
Well, I just want to ask this one question. How do we know that the flood story was real? Is there evidence like in any literature?
Well, that's an interesting point.
Over the
because,
years?
Yeah, every culture on Earth has a story of a flood like this. Now, there's variation in the stories, but there is a story of a great flood in every culture. Now, that to me says something. Something happened. That's based on something. They didn't just all get together in a smoke-filled room somewhere and say, hey, y'all, let's fool everybody.
Right.
Let's make up this story of a great flood. Now, these were people groups that were separated by time, separated geographically,
Yeah, they did.
very diverse. They did not communicate with each other. And yet they all came up with this, or they all have this same idea within their ancient traditions. So that is a line of evidence for sure.
Well, and what would happen? And people might bring up, they're like, what about the Ice Age? Okay,
Let's talk
well,
about
let's talk about the Ice Age. I think one of the best ways to explain the Ice Age is by believing that there was a flood.
Absolutely.
Because if you have a flood, what do you think happens if you have a really warm? We know that before when God originally created the world, there wasn't these. How much of our world is covered by water right now? There's 70.
I want to say it's like 70%, roughly.
So more than half the world is covered by water right now.
Yes.
Was more than half the world covered by water when God created the world?
No.
I don't think so.
No, I mean, that's the whole point of the fountains of the great deep.
Right. All the water was underground. And I'm sure there were bodies of water.
There were bodies of water, but
But there was no
the majority of the water was underground.
massive ocean or anything. So what happens if you take a warm earth and you cover it with water?
Water of what temperature?
Cold water. Or no, hot. Sorry.
Warm water. Very
Hot water.
warm, hot water. Yeah. Or warm water. And
You do that.
then you introduce temperature differences, atmospheric temperature differences.
Because we know the water came down from above.
Well, right. But,
Cooled the air off, I'm sure.
well,
Especially if it was ice and it was breaking up and coming down.
right. But the point is, you had this hot water coming up from underneath the ground, and you had the other water coming down from the atmosphere. So there was this mixture of now very warm, it formed very warm oceans. And then you have air now in some parts of the world is going to be cold. right? Because you don't have the inflow heat's not working anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. And so your atmospheric temperatures are going to get cold in the northern and far north and then the far south. So what does that do? Well, if you've got warm water and cold air, you're going to get a whole lot of precipitation. Precipitation is what I mean to say. The water cycle is going to start working, and you're going to have snow in those northern latitudes and in those southern latitudes. The equatorial regions are going to have, more of the temperate climate that they have today. But in those northern latitudes and those southern latitudes, you're going to have a lot of snow and a lot of ice. And there would be cyclic action taking place too. So when you're talking about ice age, that's what you're looking at.
Right.
It was an effect of the flood. Warm oceans, cold air,
It makes total sense.
makes total sense.
And then there you have, and that's where the Ice Age came from.
And even the different people groups that they've identified, like the Neanderthals, Cro-Magnon people, these were people that lived during those periods. They were human beings. Just like
mammoths.
Yeah, the mammoths.
They didn't survive because they weren't used to those kind of harsh temperatures and conditions.
No.
So the mammoths were, there were some woolly mammoths on the probably, otherwise they would have all flood. But but they were alive after the flood. So,
but the
they
conditions after the flood were not conducive to their survival, unfortunately.
What's interesting? Obviously we don't believe in global warming the same way that people say that it is, but I believe though the world is still warming up. It's not going to get to the point where like you can't even live on the earth anymore. We need to go to some other planet.
Mars.
It's not that, but it's that the world is still warming up from the flood and the ice age.
Well, and there have been cycles. Well, as I was saying earlier, there have been cycles because there is what the climate scientists, well, not many of the climate scientists would admit this, but there have been some who have identified what they call the medieval warm period. This was roughly around the year 1000. This is when the Vikings were doing a lot of their explorations, and the earth was warmer at that time in the north, so that they were able to grow crops in Greenland.
Yeah.
And they had permanent settlements there.
What do you expect would happen with the way the earth functions and like Earth's atmosphere, weather, things like that? What do you expect would happen if you flood the earth with water and then you go to an ice age?
It's going to disrupt things.
Things are not how God originally created them. The world is so different. It doesn't look anything like it did.
So the point being is that we have climatic cycles, and there was, following that warm period, there was a colder period, and now we're, I think, in a warmer period. But is this something that we need to shut down all the gas power plants and everything about?
No.
The answer to that is no. Of course, we need to be responsible with the way we live and so on. We don't need to be polluting the water and the air unnecessarily, but we are not the ones causing this warming.
No, and we're not gonna save the planet.
You're not going to fix it by
You're not gonna fix
buying a Tesla,
No.
as nice as Teslas are.
Now, so here's another thing.
Okay.
There's marine fossils they have found.
Yeah.
Marine fossils high up on mountains.
High up on mountains. How did those
get there?
That is evidence for a global flood.
It is. And then there's the massive fossil graveyards around the world. This little thing here says, how could this have happened unless the ocean waters rose and rapidly swept over the continents in the global catastrophic flood? There's exquisitely preserved fossils, like absolutely perfect.
So
There's squids that were fossilized with ink still in the ink pad.
yeah. So here's the significance of that.
Meaning they're
Bam.
just covered by
Right. Yeah. This is the point, and this is for our viewers that may not have heard of that or grasped the significance of that immediately. But if fossils are formed over millions of years, the point is this: we have a lot of indication of rapid deposition of these sediments and quick fossilization of these animals.
Well, honestly, when you think about it, having any fossils, not any, but you could have like a little teeny bit of fossils that would like be impossible to find. And if the world truly was evolved over millions of years, right? Because you would have like little local floods and stuff. There was no, if we're just looking at it from this perspective, there's no global flood and it's just little local things that happen. So you might see some fossils here and there, but they would be very hard to find.
Well,
Because the Earth is so big, but we find fossils everywhere. Shoot, I can go in the backyard and probably find a fossil in some of the rocks that we have here.
Yeah, the quality of preservation does indicate that these sediments were deposited rapidly and violently in some cases.
Okay, so if you think about it in the evolutionary view, so an animal dies, it lays down on the ground and it dies.
Mm-hmm.
And its flesh is going to rot off. Its bones are going to be eaten and they're going to rot off. They're going to
Eventually,
it
it takes more time for the bones.
It takes more time. But are you going to see those bones in perfect array? No, animals come and take them and eat them and chew on them. And since when have you seen a perfect carcass? I've never seen a perfect carcass laying on the ground in perfect array. Every carcass I've seen, there's like a leg missing, or there's there's parts of the body that are missing, they're gone.
Yeah, that's often how it is.
And so if it's over millions of years and they say there's like layers of dirt that kind of get put on top of millions of years. Okay, so how long does it take in evolutionary? How long does it take for an animal to die, lay down and die, for the bones and everything to be covered by sediment? How long does that take? Because how long do they say that one?
The idea
sense.
that they put out there is that it is a slow process.
That makes sense. The bones would be gone. It would be either eaten by another animal or dragged off. That doesn't make sense. So the fact that having perfectly, perfect fossils, and there's tons and tons and tons of them, having perfect fossils fossilized in rock, a fish eating another fish. Well, hold on a second. Have you guys ever seen that? There's a
So he ate too much. That's why he died.
No, there's a fossil of a fish with the tail of another fish sticking out of his mouth.
I've seen that. So he was in the process, in the act of feeding,
and he was just covered in something.
Mm-hmm.
If he was covered over time, you would think he would have finished swallowing his food.
Yeah.
The tail wouldn't be sticking out of his mouth anymore.
Right.
Those are some of the fossilization things. It just doesn't make any sense.
No, that's true.
For you to for it to take millions of years. And like I said, there was that one about, I forget what animal it was, but it's like in the midst of giving birth.
Yes. Interesting.
And there's sediments spread across continents.
Right. These sedimentary layers, you find the same layers in the same order all across continent boundaries, which is quite interesting.
Right.
So you would assume, and if those sedimentary layers are there in pretty much the same order, that there's some type of connection between how those came to be.
Yeah, and just the whole thing when you look at like the folds, the folded layers, like they're not folded layers.
Folded layers.
Sometimes they're like this, like wavy.
Ways like,
and you think of like these fossil graveyards. There's just random bones of lots of animals. You know what happens when you look at water in a bay and it's like it's going in and like pulling out. It keeps filtering the stuff that's on the bottom, keeps rolling across the bottom, and it doesn't get buried. It stays on the top. Stays up more towards the top, doesn't get pushed down. Stays up on the top. So the water, anyways, there's lots of things like that are evidence to a flood.
Interesting.
And
so what you're saying is that the scientifically and geologically, the flood story does make sense. It does explain.
It does.
It does offer a reasonable explanation for what we see.
Very much does.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that's, I think, probably a good place to leave it for today. Thanks for sharing all that evidence, Matthias. And we will cut it off here today, ladies and gentlemen, but join us for the next episode of the Great Controversy Podcast.